I'm Roniel,
I'm DaRon.
and today's going to be a very interesting topic, which I actually think it could be controversial to certain people, but it actually makes sense. And I kind of learned this from DaRon. Do you remember your name, DaRon? DaRon. The topic that we want to discuss today is concerning how many vulnerabilities should you have in a report? Should you stuff them with a bunch of vulnerabilities? Should you fluff them with a bunch of vulnerabilities? Like, what should you do? How many vulnerabilities should you put in the report? Because that is a great question. A lot of people like to stuff them with a ton of vulnerabilities. And then when the client gets the report, they're like, there's 100 vulnerabilities here. And most penetration testers are, yeah, we did a great job. We killed them, but that's not what you're really here for. That is not your job. So, DaRon, I would like to know your input on what you feel about stuffing reports with tons of vulnerabilities.
I think you're right, and the verbiage is spot on. For some reason, a lot of organizations have this mindset that when I run an engagement, I need to put as many findings as I can on the report. And in a lot of cases, it almost comes off as nitpicking because you'll see tons of lows, just tons and tons of lows, and a lot of them are eerily similar, and you're left scratching your head going, how is this different than the last one, besides the fact that your input changed from a 1 to a 2?
So you got fluffer uppers. That's what I call them.
That's
Fluffer
right.
Uppers.
That's right. And so there is obviously the opposite problem where you have a report that has 1 finding, no findings, or 3 findings, and usually that comes off as you didn't do your job. Now, some people will be all excited and go, yay, we're just that secure. I think we all know that's not accurate. Typically, if you walk away from an assessment and you only have a couple findings, either 1, you had the wrong people on the assessment, or 2, they scoped the hell out of it. So you were testing nothing. Or nothing of value. Maybe the software didn't work, or maybe the software only did like 2 things because it's not really complete yet. And in those 2 things, nothing was wrong. But any application of any reasonable size is going to have stuff. It's going to have vulnerabilities. Just like any system of any reasonable size is going to have vulnerabilities. System meaning, operating system, set of computers, network, whatever you want it to mean.
But then there's a lot of times that you could do everything you check for and there's nothing to find. But normally, sometimes you usually find something.
Right.
But do you really want to fluff up your report because you didn't find anything? I mean, you could show every step you went through, but do you really want to fluff it up? But then that also goes to the skill set. Some people don't have the right skill sets for the engagement that they're on, but a lot of times these companies will put somebody who's not as skilled on that engagement, especially when you have those shared bench type of environments. So somebody might get put on there and they only know how to do certain things or certain checks.
To that point, so this goes to a couple of important topics. First and foremost, when you select a team, always make sure you have at least 2 people on the engagement.
Yes, agree.
The overlapping skills of the individuals and then where they don't, so the difference in the skill sets, actually will result in a significantly better outcome. But the other component to having at least 2 is you have different perspectives, and it also gives you a chance to bring junior folks on, get them paid, and have them get experience watching and helping someone who is more experienced. And they may not be junior people. They could be senior people who are just junior in that thing. But that's, I think, so you have that side of it. And that's, again, why you should have at least 2 people. But when you have a slaughter where I'm walking away and I've got 60, 70, 80, 120 different findings, you cannot put each one on the report as a separate finding. You can't.
Been down that road. You remember what happened?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, literally, they're giving an example. May not even name the company, but I remember being at a company with me and DaRon worked at, and we had this assessment. And I told the director that there was a ton of stuff here, and I'm only going to, maybe talk about 15, and I'm gonna, bunch them together. She says, no, 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 no. They have to understand that they need to get their stuff in order. It's like, but there's going to be hundreds of findings because there are a lot of stuff is old stuff. Like they're using old libraries and stuff that which could be grouped into known vulnerabilities, right? No, she wanted them all separated. So when I gave this to the client, and I mean, there were a ton, I stopped at a certain point because it was just getting ridiculous. The client looked at it and was like, this is phenomenal, but we're just going to just move on to another application. We're not going to worry about this. We're moving on to something else, but not noticing that there's an issue because they still have clients to support that use older application. So they're going to be vulnerable to all of these things. And they're not going to fix them because they were just overwhelmed, because you got to think about it. Developers and other people have to fix these or patch these issues. So, they're not going to get it fixed in the next time for the next release. So they're just going to scrap it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Every single time, if you come in and you have 20 findings, that project is probably going to get scrapped. Anything over 13, and it's probably gone. And you may be asking, well, what the hell am I supposed to do? And the answer is you're supposed to use your head and group the vulnerabilities together. For example, do I really need to separate LDAP injection, SQL injection, SOQL injection, and we'll say remote code injection? The answer is you don't have to. If you have a lot of findings, you can group those three together because their underlying cause is the exact same, and that is insufficient input validation. And you would instead list those different examples off within that. So you'd have your description that talks about how you should properly sanitize, validate, etc., data, and all of this other stuff. And then you have a section that is examples. And within that section of examples, you would have the SQL injection, you would have the SOQL injection, you would have the remote code execution by just sending arbitrary code. And then you would, of course, have whatever other examples that you have that are similar. And this is no different than what if you're talking applications, what your static code analysis tool does, what your dynamic code analysis tool does. In both cases, they group them together. The only difference is how they group them together. I'll give you a good example. I did an engagement, and this was on a weapons platform. So for this weapons platform, and it's a major weapons platform, they had over 30,000 of one kind of vulnerability alone. I'm not going to say what the vulnerability was. I don't want to get killed. But they had over 30,000 of that kind of vulnerability alone. They had 40,000 of another one, and so on and so forth. I mean, it was bad. There was blood all over the place. I'm not going to sit there and get the project killed. Instead, what I do is just what we described. I collapsed them together, and then I stated, okay, well, this is your problem, gave a description, and then I gave a few examples. And then you talk with the development team, with the system owner, with whomever, separately, and you explain to them the vulnerability in general, what was going on, and you give them a template to find the various instances. Because here's the thing, and this is something that no one likes to talk about. I guarantee you didn't find every instance of the vulnerability in your engagement. I guarantee it. I don't care what your engagement is. I don't care if it was a white box. I don't care if it was gray box, and I don't care if it was black box. I promise you didn't find every instance. So your job in every engagement is to give the development team or a system administrator or whomever the tools that they need in order to find all the instances themselves. We are empowering them to do their job right, to do their job well.
So what happens, Ron, when the project manager tells you or your point of contact tells you, hey, I want some of these things separated. Do you still separate them because they asked you to, or do you let them know that, hey, this would just make it overwhelming if they want majority to separate it? Like, what is your thought about that?
The one of the most important things that your project managers, your management on the examiner side, on the assessor side, needs to understand, they should understand how to make the information the most palatable that it needs to be in order to achieve the desired goal. And what is the desired goal in the whole thing? To secure a system, right?
Yep.
So truthfully, I think we have far too many instances where you've got these managers and QA who are looking at these results and they don't know enough about the way the real world works to understand the impacts of suggestions like that. Now, in some cases, it's legitimate. Some cases, they're looking at it and they're going, okay, you have 6 findings, but you've got a few of these that are grouped. We can splay these out, which will just make it more impactful because we don't want them to get lost. You really don't want to be beyond 13 separate findings in a given report. So you do want to try to group it as much as possible. When you hit 20, I mean, people's brains explode. Their management is like, we need to kill this. It's too much work and all this other stuff. So I haven't helped you if you hit 20. But if you're at 6, telling you, hey, let's break this out so that it's maybe 9 or 10, that's okay. But if you're at 12 and they want to break it out to 15, that's way too many findings. Most development teams will shutter a project for something like that. Most systems, they'll shutter a project. And you've seen it.
It's crazy. Like I say, a lot of times I've had people ask me that, okay, well, this vulnerability, even though it's the same thing as this one, maybe like insecure storage. And they'll say, well, this is still insecure storage, but I don't think it's as high as the rating of the other one. So can we separate this out?
Yeah,
and I'm like, either way, they're still the same thing. And I still think it has an issue regardless. So it should be categorized with that. Doesn't really matter. But they'll think, oh, it's not that big of an issue. And like I said, it'll happen with a lot of those. And then you end up having, like, I'm a big component. I always have 30 or more findings. And I'm like, hey, I got to shrink this down because, as you said, it gets overwhelming. It looks bad. It looks bad for the client. And then when they take it back to their bosses and stuff, and they're like, so what the hell are you guys doing? What do I pay you guys for? So it makes it look very bad on them. But you don't want to have that many. Limited as much as possible because 15 goes to 30 goes to more, and then your project is scrapped.
Right. And you actually will come off as a bit of a bully.
Okay, well, here's what I want to say. Yeah, you come off as a bit of a bully, but what about those people who are those clients that you have that you find 15 to 20, and they're like, oh yeah, thank you, you're great, you're awesome. And when you miss three, but you found all of these things, you missed 3 findings because they gave you a shit ton of stuff in one time, and you missed 3 of them, or 4 or 5, whatever. And they're looking at you like, how couldn't you find this? But you just said that was awesome. And what you want me to find a ton? You want me to just it's like they want you to just blow it away. And one of the guys a long time ago, he really wanted to have to fluff up the report so he could literally go back and shit on his team members. What type of boss is that?
Yeah, that's a terrible boss. And I've seen other instances where you had system administrators who were asking us to make the report look damning and not to group so that they could get more funding. And I actually had to caution them and say, well, you have to be real careful with that tactic. That backfires real fast. Oh, well, but I need to convince them that they need to take security seriously and fund us better. Sometimes you get what you ask for, but you're exactly right. You've got, from time to time, I have met management that egged you on to find more things. And that's awkward. because it's their own people they're dogging on.
And then that's what I find weird. Like, and I have to let people know all the time, clients know, like, hey, I'm not here to, bully you guys. I'm not here to make you guys embarrassed. My job is to find the vulnerabilities before the attacker does, and to help you guys remediate these things, and
Right.
not to make you guys feel like, oh, you got a shitty product. I'm not here to shit or
Right.
talk about your baby, but a lot of the times you have clients who's like, I want you to find as many as possible, fill that report up, fluff her upper, like, and you're like, look, what about the times when you can't fluff up a report, and you're like, I was only able to find maybe 2 or 3, and they're like, well, I don't feel like you did anything. And then you have people who actually on your team will say, well, what did you do? There has to be more than that. And I'm like, if you can't fluff it, don't fluff it.
It was a static website. What was there to test?
Especially when you're doing an external pen test, like especially network, you're not probably going to find much. And like, you didn't find, what did you do here? And I'm like, it's not me, but just saying in particular, like, dude, like, this, nobody's going to fluff this up because you want the client to feel happy with something. Like, if they don't have any vulnerabilities, we couldn't find anything from this external, they may be good, right? For now, at this point in time, we don't know what they're going to add in between. But like, I don't get it. Like, the whole goal here is to help the client find the vulnerabilities for the attacker test. And it's not to fluff up, a report. It's not to overly fluff, make believe shit. It's to help the client understand what their issues are.
And if you dogged them so badly that they killed a project, you didn't help them. So you remember we had the one where I had 11 things in the report, but within that, for example, there were 800 instances of one of the vulnerabilities, just to give an example. And in the report, we gave some examples, and then one of the keys to this, and this is why it's so important to not fluff up your report, and why it's actually valuable to group in a lot of cases. It's a case-by-case basis. Sometimes you don't want to group something because you're trying to emphasize a certain point. So maybe they had, I don't know, file injection. And so you didn't group that into the insecure input validation because you wanted to make it clear you felt that file injection deserved its own spotlight, so to speak. But what we have to remember is when we do all of this, our goal really is to help them secure themselves. And if I can instead teach people to see the markers and to see the similarity in the vulnerabilities, because the fix is the exact same.
Yep.
Then,
that's what people don't understand.
Right.
Yep.
I'm actually doing them a disservice by going through and breaking it out into a million different pieces. And I'm actually making their development team not see the light because they don't see the abstract that is this greater fix. And instead, all they're doing is their blinders are on and they say, okay, well, you found remote file include. I'm just going to fix that. And they don't say, wait. There actually was another thing that you didn't find because time constraints and all this other stuff that was actually in that same code. And if I just went upstream and fixed this insecure input validation, then I would have fixed the other thing that you didn't see. And that's the key here. The other thing that wasn't remote file include or that wasn't anything like that, but it's still insecure input validation. And that's why we have to teach people, I don't need 50 findings. I don't need 20 findings. I need 10 solid findings. I need 13 solid findings. I need 6 solid findings. I don't care what the number is, so long as it's 13 or below. And they have to be solid and they have to show that abstracted fix, the abstracted solution. That way, they can fix the actual underlying issue. And the team learns, the system administrators, database administrators, whomsoever learns the proper lesson, which isn't, I just need to fix this one thing.
I think that you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think all of this transpired from the network penetration testing aspect, because I've seen tons of network penetration testers that they flood a report. And I mean, you get a nested scan, you're like, yes, this, and lows, 100 lows, 100 this and 100 that. And then it just kind of carried over to application security.
Yeah.
Because a lot of those people moved over to that. And, it just kind of carried that same methodology over, or philosophy over. Hey, you need to fill all of this up with all of these different vulnerabilities. And that's not true. Maybe, I'm not saying they should or should not category. It may be a reason why they separate things out in the network test, but you shouldn't do that with application. All of these things could be grouped because they're the same issue.
See,
there's that fundamental.
Right. And the real difference that a lot of people don't understand is in the network world, most of the findings that you have are fixed by different configuration settings.
Yep.
So typically, most of the network vulnerabilities that are found are need to update or patch, or it's a configuration issue. And so you have to change different values in that config file, be it the router or switch or firewall or whatever configuration file. On the application side, it doesn't work that way. And that's the big issue, is for the networking side, you don't necessarily want to group it together, because what do they need to do? Usually, well, you need to go and you need to change this flag in your router, or set this flag in your switch, or you need to set up different, I don't know, subnets, whatever, Whereas in the application world, we've got this big bucket, this grouping of things, and now I actually have to make changes across code, but the changes are all the same general thing. The fixes are the same. And that, I think you're exactly right. They did pour over that network scanning mentality, because they in many cases, they don't understand that in order to make these changes, really, if I'm fixing SQL injection, that is no different than fixing LDAP injection, which is no different than fixing remote code injection. It's the same fix in all the cases.
It's injection. That's what it is.
That's exactly right.
Same thing for cross-site scripting. It's injection. It's the same fix, and it's different. It's code. It's not configurations and stuff like that. And you may have some instances, like I said, there are a lot of times now, as you on my reports, I group everything. When I do IoT, if I can group them, I group them. If not, then I will separate them. And a lot of times, I'm doing multiple things. I'm doing firmware analysis, hardware analysis, and then you have the network analysis and stuff like that. So a lot of the times it'll be different, but I try to group the things that are similar so they'll understand. Otherwise, like I tell the client, that you'll have a ton of vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
And you don't want that. So I try to group things that I can, even when I'm doing application security.
Well, hopefully that'll help someone. Hopefully that can help at least improve your reports. A lot of people are doing it in a way because I don't think they've been on the other side. I don't think they've been on the development side. So I don't think that they understand what happens when you hand off this big report. It doesn't result in anything positive, and it certainly doesn't achieve our goals. Our goals are not, as you said, not to sit there and badmouth the developers or system administrators or whomsoever. Our goals are to help them secure their systems. And we need to ensure that our reports achieve that. What that means is the reports need to be clear, they need to be concise, they need to provide a template or pattern for them to, number one, find the instances, and number two, resolve them. And they need to not have fluff. And that fluff includes silly, stupid things like narratives. That fluff includes things like 20 million different instances of the same vulnerability. You don't need they don't need 20 instances of the same vulnerability, and they certainly don't need them to be separate findings each time. Give them one finding. You can give them a few different instances that give them a flavor of the issue and walk away. It's that simple.
And just because you hack things or you're a red teamer, doesn't mean that you are a bully. Doesn't mean you should bully. And I call that bullying. And also I should get a shirt called No More Fluff. But that doesn't mean that that's your job. That's not right. If you're doing that, you don't need to be there. Your whole goal is to provide your client with the necessary things they need to reproduce your vulnerability or the vulnerability you found and be able to remediate it. That is your goal. Your goal is not to fluff things. Your goal is not to look like the greatest because you got 100. And I had a client, I had somewhere where they were just like, oh yeah, we went in there and they said nobody could do this and we found this. Even if they told you nobody can find this, doesn't mean it's your job to go in there and find 100 vulnerabilities. That's still gonna make them look like shit and make you look great. And what was your job then? Like what did you do? What did you do to help that company? You just shitted on their company. Now they scrapped their whole project. They don't even want to see their faces to be seen. But you're sitting over here like, yeah, we did great. We showed them clients.
Yeah.
No, you showed the client that they should not hire you again.
Yeah, you killed it. We killed it. We killed it. Oh, you killed it all right.
Yeah, you killed that, and you killed that the money maker. You killed that whole project. So that is not the goal of red team, whatever, even with blue team, whatever. Doesn't matter. That is not your goal if you're consultant, contractor, whatever. So hopefully this helped you guys understand how to not fluff up your report. Do not create these fluffer uppers, and maybe it'll help you make better reports and understand how to help your clients better.
Yes.
So with that being said, I'm Roniel.
I'm DaRon.
And if you like this, video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Also, again, get you some great value water to stay hydrated. Until the next time.
Have fun.
Have fun.